I call the honourable member Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It was interesting to hear Nick Smith talk about record on housing affordability of a government. From a government where housing prices have gone up 36% since they came into office. As David Parker says, in a recession, housing prices have gone up 36% in Auckland under this government. So Nick Smith wants to lecture the House about housing affordability. And the fact is, Mr Speaker, that in this bill that has been referred for a truncated select committee process, there is very little that assures housing affordability at all. They have to take it into consideration. Yet again, another part of this budget where things are being considered rather than being done. The housing plans may include affordable housing. Mr Speaker, this bill, if it was to do what was needed in affordable housing, may need to be rushed through this House. If there was something in this we could all see that was addressing the range of issues that are required to get affordable housing in New Zealand, maybe there'd be a justification for pushing it through. But Mr Speaker, this deals only with one aspect of that. And it is disturbing, Mr Speaker, to be standing here again only a few days after I last spoke in a referral motion debate for the National Party to once again be deciding that the select committee process on a bill should be truncated in the way that it is. We are down now to a 2-month consideration of this bill. And Mr Speaker, I simply do not believe that length of time will be sufficient to allow the scrutiny that this bill needs. Dr Smith obviously missed a lot of the speeches from Labor members because he clearly didn't understand that our agreement to send this to a select committee had reservations attached to it. Those reservations are what needs to be explored in a proper select committee process. And Mr Speaker, the regulatory impact statement on this bill indicates why there are issues with such a truncated process. It talks about the fact that the development of the option the government has put forward under budget secrecy rules has meant that options have not been consulted on with stakeholders and affected parties outside of Parliament. That's what the regulatory impact statement is telling us. It's saying to this House, because of the way the government has gone about developing this proposal, they haven't talked to anybody about it. They haven't talked to local government who are critically involved in whether or not this can work and whether or not it is actually possible for there to be specified housing areas. And we heard from Nick Smith that he thought it would be a partnership between central and local government. Well, local government hasn't even been consulted up to this point, and now they're going to be faced with a truncated select committee process where their ability to actually influence the bill, where their ability to raise some of the issues that we are concerned about whether or not these housing areas will actually work, will be limited by this referral motion, Mr Speaker. And once again, the National Party has brought a bill to this House, having mucked around on this issue for months and months, having ignored the pleas of the Labor Party, of the Auckland Council and of others to actually get on with helping Auckland to address its housing crisis. For 5 years it sat on its hands on the issue of housing, and it comes to the House today and says, you've only got 2 months, it's got to go straight through. Well, Mr Speaker, that is once again this national government treating this House with disrespect, with contempt for the processes of democracy and the contempt for the select committee process. And Mr Speaker, New Zealanders all around the world who are interested in politics, who write about politics, talk about the importance of our select committee process. It's quite unique in the world, and it's vitally important, Mr Speaker, to this House's processes. We don't have a second chamber. We only have one chamber. This is it. We have to have a robust select committee process in order to give legitimacy and credibility to the work that we do here. John Burrows, Law Commissioner, 1990 said, select committees are a crucial bastion of democracy in our legislative process. And every time the National Party brings a truncated motion to this House without good justification, he says, this is a crucial bastion of our democracy. National says we don't care about that. Sam Lotoinga interjects as he wanders around the House saying, what would Len Brown say? I'll tell you what Len Brown would say, Mr Lotoinga. He'd say, where was National for the last 5 years when there was a housing crisis in Auckland? What was National doing then? Sitting on their hands, doing nothing to resolve the housing affordability crisis, having the Prime Minister deny there even was a housing affordability crisis. That's what Len Brown would be saying, and he would be saying, I want to see a process where people can have their say, because, Mr Speaker, that is what we should have in this process. Mr Speaker, I am concerned whenever there is a truncated select committee process about the way in which the public will be able to make submissions. This is a bill on which people will have strong views. It does make significant change to the Resource Management Act. It places on local councils significant obligations to work with central government on whether or not there will be special housing areas, and it does give significant power to the Minister of Housing where there cannot be agreement on those areas. Those are significantly increased powers, and there will be a range of submitters who will want to submit on that. Not only local government, the New Zealand Law Society, who will often make submissions on these bills when they are making such significant change to law. They will be forced into a rushed process as well, Mr Speaker. Environmental NGOs, as my colleague David Parker says, the Environmental Defence Society and others who have provided... Morris Williamson's not a fan of the Environmental Defence Society. He better talk to Nick Smith. Nick Smith does like the Environmental Defence Society. We know that. And they should be given a chance to have their submission on this. Morris Williamson should be given his chance to have a submission on this. The putative Mayor of Auckland, Morris Williamson, he would want to have a submission go in on this bill to make sure that he can have a say about what's happening with housing affordability in Auckland. But Morris Williamson's opportunity to actually have a say on this bill will be severely limited by this truncated select committee process, Mr Speaker. I just want to return to the regulatory impact statement in terms of the reasons why a longer process is needed. I've mentioned already the fact that they note there that there has been no external consultation whatsoever. They also say that there is insufficient information on land supply restrictions across New Zealand, across local authorities in New Zealand. So the select committee is going to need to research that. It's going to need to say what is the extent of the problem elsewhere in New Zealand, and do the things that are in this bill stack up? Are they required? We know quite a lot in Auckland about what's happening there around the impact of land supply, but we don't have that information about the rest of New Zealand. While this bill is driven by the fact that the Auckland Council has finally managed to convince the government to act and support them in their unitary plan, it actually applies to the whole of New Zealand. And that means that we do need more time at the Select Committee to be able to get information about what is the impact of land restrictions in other authority jurisdictions. The regulatory impact statement also says that at the moment there's insufficient detail on the specific operations of how this option will work. We don't actually know what the impact of this will be on the behaviours of landowners or the commercial decisions of property developers. And, Mr Speaker, we need the time at the Select Committee to be able to analyse whether or not this is the right option, whether or not this is the way that this should go. And, Mr Speaker, one of the interesting points that the regulatory impact statement makes is that there's insufficient information on the provision of the infrastructure that will actually be required to support the kinds of developments that are being proposed in this bill. That's because the national government has only just caught up with the idea it needs to do something about housing affordability. It's put up a bill in front of this House that only goes to some small extent of addressing that. It ignores all the other measures that it would be possible for them to put in place and puts up a bill that maybe might consider doing something about housing affordability, and they do that in a truncated Select Committee process that simply will not give New Zealanders the opportunity to have a say. It will not give this legislation legitimacy. Legitimacy in our parliamentary system in New Zealand comes from a proper Select Committee process. We are not going to see that proper Select Committee process under the motion that the Minister has just moved. Mr Speaker, the 26th of July is simply not enough time. In this system, in this House, 6 months is what it should be, 4 months is what it often is, 2 months is simply not enough. And this government needs to understand that the people of New Zealand deserve to have a say. Labor has supported this bill to the Select Committee, but we do not support this referral motion. This referral motion is wrong. It is a continuation of this government's anti-democratic approach when it comes to lawmaking, and particularly when it comes to the role of local government. I urge members in the House to vote against this referral motion so that New Zealanders can have a proper say on this, and so that we can actually explore real options for housing affordability rather than this weak, limp response from National.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Holly Walker.